If you've ever felt like traditional therapy helped but didn't quite reach the deepest layers, this conversation is for you. So many of the therapists and healers I talk to say the same thing. I've done the work, and yet something deeper is still calling. Today's guest works exactly in that space where nervous system regulation, spirituality, and deep healing meet. Keep listening as we explore what becomes possible when healing moves beyond insight alone and into the deeper layers of safety, integration, and transformation. Welcome to the Spiritually Curious Therapist, where science, spirit, and the self come together in the art of healing. I'm Jody Silverman, psychotherapist, Reiki master, and fellow seeker. Here we explore how presence, compassion, and nervous system wisdom helps us reconnect with the heart, the body, and the soul. Hello, and welcome back to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. Today we have with us Juliana Sloane, and I am going to actually read off her bio. So Juliana is a Buddhist teacher, hypnotherapist, and coach specializing in depth hypnosis, applied shamanic counseling, and client-centered neuroplasticity. She blends ancient wisdom traditions, hypnosis, and evidence-based approaches to help individuals create lasting transformation beyond the conscious mind. Some of her primary areas of specialization include spiritual emergence, leadership and confidence, relationship issues, chronic illness, trauma, and anxiety. Juliana, you could be my sister practitioner in all the things that you do and the ways in which you approach it. So I'm really curious to hear more about you and the interventions that you use to do this work. So maybe just start with telling us a little bit about who you are and how you came to do this work.
Absolutely. And thanks, Jody, for having me. It's so nice to be here spending this morning with you to share just a little of the arc of my story. Honestly, it doesn't always fit perfectly into a neat and tidy box. But what I can tell you is from a very young age, I was always that sensitive, dreamy, spiritually oriented, very compassionate and caring, but very, very tenderhearted kid. Of course, many of us who grew up like that later in life discover that we actually have ADHD. So that of course is something that I am learning. Many of my clients are learning, what does it mean to be this sensitive, creative, mystical person in a world that doesn't always accommodate that. So from a very early age, there always was a sense of curiosity, longing for things that felt deeper, more expansive, beyond just the surface level things that many people around me were kind of navigating through their lives. Of course, over time, this developed into an interest in spirituality, into an interest in healing. Much of this for me, there's a whole chapter that comes before this, but much of this for me really took a turning point after I experienced a pretty significant trauma when I was in my 20s. And at that point, there really was a turning point in the road. And the question was sort of, well, okay, do you want to go about your life pushing all of the sensitivity, pushing the spiritual yearning, pushing the depths under the rug? Or do we want to go all in on this? And so over the decades that followed, it really has been a journey on what does it look like to explore healing for myself, explore healing for my clients, explore how we can bring these teachings, this wisdom, these techniques into greater and greater usefulness at a time when the world really needs it. You know, it's something that I feel particularly passionate about at this time because we need that regulation and that support more than ever.
I would agree 100%. I love the arc of your story because I can really relate in so many different ways. And also, sometimes we come into this work in these very kind of quiet ways. And the journey just keeps unfolding. And as we show up every day, the next step is just kind of shown to us as we move through. So I can really appreciate the arc and how you got into the work and why, and kind of grew into this way of being with folks in the world.
Yeah. So much of the time it is that organic process of, okay, what's the next right step? What's the next right step? And
Yeah.
I'm grateful that it led me to some incredible learning and some really fantastic tools, as well as the comfort with being in the uncertainty of exactly where will this take me next.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So given all of that, tell us what was your first foray into using these tools that you use and even using them professionally? Did you have your own personal experience with them and then wanting to learn more, or how did that unfold for you?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I came to all of these tools for my own growth and my own healing. The first time, and as a meditation teacher, the first time I really dipped into deep spiritual practice was actually as a teenager. I was very involved in some yogic traditions, especially kirtan, chanting. And there was something that happened for me with the experience of devotional chanting that actually gave me immense relief and hope and connection. I struggled with very, very significant depression and anxiety as a teen. And all of a sudden, I was being exposed to this practice that granted me a significant amount of relief. The thread of all of that continued as I got older. I dove really deep into Buddhist practice. Much of my initial experience was in silent meditation retreat. So, over the years, I have taught on silent meditation retreat, supported silent meditation retreat, but of course also been a participant myself, sometimes going into silence, meditating, 12 hours plus a day for up to a few months. And so that was something that was profoundly deep learning experience for how does my nervous system move through the world? What is happening here? For me, I also started to have what could only be described really as shamanic experiences while on long retreats. And it did propel me to get curious more and more about what's actually underneath the surface here when we do look into altered state, healing, trance work, all of that. For me, and this is true of so many of the clients that I work with, I had gone to therapy, I had done coaching, I had read all the books, and I intellectually really understood the patterns that were happening in my life. But it always felt like there was something, deeper under the surface at an energetic or embodied or archetypal level that also needed to be healed. And so for me, all of these trance-based, altered state-based modalities really opened the door for me on finally kind of working with that last layer after so much of the archaeology had already been excavated and turned over and understood and healed. It really helped me get to that deeper layer. And usually the people who come to see me often say, yeah, I'm just looking for something that gets me to that deeper layer. I want something that's a little bit different than telling my story and talking about what's going on.
Yeah, I hear that so often, and you're absolutely right. I think, therapy, especially talk therapy, is super helpful. I mean, I'm a therapist, and it gets you to a certain point. And oftentimes people will have that experience of like, I feel like I've done my work, but yet there's something more, and I'm not quite sure. And as of late, many people are turning towards psychedelics for that altered state of consciousness experience. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you work with altered states of consciousness versus what a psychedelic experience might be.
Absolutely. And so, one thing to know, I do support people in preparing for and integrating psychedelic experiences.
Fabulous.
Because there are a lot of people out there, they go to a place, they have a ceremony, or they go to a ketamine clinic, or something happens, and those experiences often are like drinking from the fire hose. It is so much information, so much intensity, so much experience coming through all at once. And often, we don't always have the tools and the comfort level to sort of take it all in and let it work us in that moment. There's so much more that's needed in terms of integrating what happens in a medicine session. So that is part of what I do, as well as, of course, working in altered states with other people. The thing that I love actually about the work that I offer to folks is that we're doing altered state healing that has a similar impact and efficacy as psychedelics, but it is something that is much shorter in duration. So, you'll be with me for 60, 75 minutes rather than maybe a whole day or a whole long weekend or, many days at once. And part of what that does is it makes things bite size. We get to work with a little piece of material, and then we get together a week or two later, we work with another piece of material, and we keep going in a way that doesn't actually overload the system. What's really cool about, hypnosis, about shamanic journey work, is that it's happening in our minds in the same way that psychedelics do. Hypnosis activates brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is the same thing that when people are using plant medicine or using psychedelics, that impacts neuroplasticity, stress and cortisol levels. It impacts learning and memory. So we're really opening up the neuroplasticity of the brain, and we're saying, okay, what can I uncover here that's different? What patterns can I renegotiate or reimagine or re-envision? And, it is really beautiful. There have been some studies recently over the last few years out of University of Michigan, too, that show they compared shamanic journey work and psychedelics. And they had a group of people who learned to do the journey and a group of people who were taking psychedelics. And they measured, what's the experience that people are having of insight, of a sense of unity or oneness, of a sense of kind of an expansive spirituality. And all of these factors that are so core to psychedelic experience, they found when someone is supported to skillfully do shamanic journey work, which does not use a substance, that the experiences of that insight, that spirituality, that oneness, that expansiveness, that dissolution of ego is actually as significant, if not more so, than psychedelics.
Wow.
And it happens in a much more manageable dose. So it's something that, especially for people who are busy, who are maybe taking care of kids, who have jobs that are very demanding, are engaged in their communities in ways that maybe they can't get away for a week, or they're not really quite ready to undergo that experience. Some of these other altered state healing methods are just such an incredible gift to supporting a psychedelic type experience without having to fully engage in that way.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. There were a couple things that you said in there that I want to come back to.
Yeah.
One is something that comes up over and over again, having to do with this idea of like bite-sized pieces and not overwhelming the nervous system, and the need to build the capacity for safety within somebody's system. And the more I dive into this nervous system work and learn more and more and do my own work, the more I'm becoming aware of how many of these interventions don't take that into consideration. And as a result, it can be, the interventions can be overwhelming in and of themselves. But even if they're not fully integrated because your nervous system won't let you, because of the need for safety and protection. And so I know I did some psychedelic assisted psychotherapy training, especially around preparation and integration. And one of the big things they talked about is if you don't do the preparation and integration work, it just becomes an experience that sits on a shelf. Like, it doesn't,
Exactly.
right, really impact any kind of change in terms of how a person might either perceive their life or behave in their life. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But from a nervous system perspective, I believe a big part of that is because the nervous system will only allow you to take in so much.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate this idea of these bite-sized pieces and the integration of safety in the work as a way of helping the nervous system acclimate and fully integrate. Is that like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. One of my mentors and teachers, she talks about this work as plant medicine in slow motion.
Mhm.
And there is something about that it's like we get to walk this gently, intentionally, thoughtfully every step of the way. And instead of it being this, big overloading experience, it gets to be something that over time works us, helps us re-envision and reimagine things. I mean, we wouldn't take a full course of antibiotics in one day. It's meant to be spaced over a week or several weeks. And I think sometimes when it comes to this kind of healing work that does place people in contact with the unknown and with kind of the wildest reaches of the mind and spirit, that it is so important that we contain it in a way that people don't feel overloaded in that way. I mean, we hear so many stories about, billionaires going and doing an ayahuasca retreat. And, guess what? They keep on billionairing. Like the same behaviors keep on happening, even if they had an insight of oneness, even if they had an insight of their interconnectedness with all beings. And so, my question, because we can't separate our internal healing work from our work and our contributions to the world, is how do we actually make healing both manageable and magical so that we can take these lessons and truly live into them rather than just having it be kind of a novel experience that was something to tell stories about at parties.
Yeah, I love this idea of manageable and magical, keeping like one foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
And I actually heard something very similar earlier today. I was listening to a book, and what the author was saying was that this same idea of like we can't separate out like our soul and our soul work and the fact that we are human beings on this earth, and
Yeah.
we're here to walk this planet and be fully human. And it's really, I always come back to, for me, it's like nervous system and soul, and the goal is to have the two of them be in alignment with each other. And it's this constant coming together or going apart, coming together, going apart, that we have to ride this wave. And so it's just really interesting. You're saying, it feels like you're saying the same thing in a little bit of a different way, but bringing in this like shamanic altered state work as a way of bringing those two things together.
Absolutely. It is so important to me that some of this work be grounded, practical mysticism. And we don't always hear those words combined together. But it is so important that we actually develop a skill set of staying balanced and grounded and integrated and secure, and also opening up to this wider, more expansive, more vibrant possibility of what we are capable as human beings. And so this really, it may not be quite as sexy. Some of these things we see out there promising, oh, it's going to be a magic wand that solves all of your problems. But, and this is partly, I think, due to my Buddhist roots. Part of the question always is, how do we remain deeply present with our lives, with our embodiment, with our experience on this earth, while also being connected to this vast, expansive consciousness that, can support us profoundly in our healing. Both of those things need to be true, I think, for us to actually do good healing work.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And it is interesting because that it's a similar journey to the psychotherapeutic Reiki or Reiki assisted psychotherapy that I've been doing and teaching other people in terms of how we bring Reiki into the therapy room to support us and the therapy. The part of the story is that I was doing training or starting to enter the world of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And I kind of hit a barrier for some of the reasons that you're describing, but also because being in private practice, I had some, concern and fear about doing it on my own without the support of others in a larger practice. But there was an aha moment as I was going through the training and as I was learning about altered states of consciousness from that perspective that I was like, Reiki does a very similar thing. It's not as intense. It's not a whole day long, but it has the capacity to shift people into this altered state and do deeper work from there.
Yeah.
And why, yeah. So I really, really resonate with what you're sharing. So that being said, can you tell us a little bit more, because I'm not sure that everybody knows about the journey work. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, great question. And, it's funny, before we started recording, I'm just thinking back to, we were talking a little bit about, oh yeah, there's misconceptions about hypnosis. There's also misconceptions sometimes about journey work, because a lot of people, when folks hear that, oh, I do shamanic journey work with clients, they immediately jump to, oh, so you're administering psychedelics. And, I think psychedelics are incredibly powerful for healing. And there is such an important place. I'm so thrilled that we are actually getting there in terms of making so much more possible, so much more training, so much more availability for safe therapeutic psychedelic interventions.
Absolutely.
And that said, the work that I do is, not using any kind of a medicine, not using any kind of substance. What we're doing actually is we're using the rhythmic beat of a drum to induce a trance-like state. And the really amazing thing about this is that this is simply a function of our physiology, of our neurology, that when we hear that repetitive rhythmic beat, that our mind entrains into a trance-like state. This happens with drumming and in many shamanic traditions across cultures. I mean, every continent pretty much except Antarctica, there are shamanic traditions that have deep, deep roots before organized religion came onto the scene. Each one of us comes from some ancestral lineage that had shamanic practices. So that's also one thing that I think is really important to name, that, what we are doing is something that humans have done. All humans, all cultures. And so we're using the rhythmic beat of the drum. In some other traditions, it's chanting. In some other traditions, like in Australia, they might use the didgeridoo. It's a repetitive, rhythmic, entrancing sound. I think it's probably part of why people also really love electronic dance music. It has a similar driving pace. So you see that there's actually an entrainment that's even happening there. And what we're doing is we're taking that drum beat and we are going to, in a particular process that includes visualization, that includes opening our senses, hearing, taste, smell, touch, the intuitive sense of knowing, to connect with what I'll talk about as a guide. And we can conceive of a guide as an aspect of the earth, or an aspect of the benevolence, the compassion, the support of the universe. We might think about it as an ally within ourselves that has more answers, more power, more wisdom, more ability to tap into what's true. And we are working with the guide and this trance-like state to receive healing, teachings, insight. Oftentimes, what we do is we journey with a particular question or a particular issue in mind. And just like when people are experiencing a trance-like state in psychedelic therapy, there are insights, there are visuals, there are messages and information and felt sense experience that come through from this type of guidance. And so we really use the journey actually as the kind of main healing modality, and then take some time to process it, to understand what might be happening. In a lot of ways, this feels kind of like reaching for understanding of, something that happened in a dream, so that we can understand more of like, okay, what's coming through the subconscious? And then, of course, clients are encouraged to listen. I'll record their journey for them. They'll listen to it a few times after to allow the experience to continue to integrate and settle, because they'll actually be speaking the journey out loud so that they can have a record of this. This is one thing I think that can be really, really helpful, because like a psychedelic experience, you have a profound experience. And then a week later, you're sort of like, oh, okay, I remember these parts of it, but I don't remember everything. So there's something very powerful about working in this way, where people can actually go back to the messages, the information, the experience, the state that they were in. And over time, I teach the client how to do journeys on their own. And so we might do a journey together. I might give them journey homework of, okay, do these 3, 4, 5 journeys before the next time we meet. And then they'll come back a week or two later and they'll tell me about what happened in their journeys. We'll go another layer deeper. We'll keep exploring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so beautiful. And so what does that look like in terms of changes somebody might make in their lives or in their perception as a result of these journeys?
Absolutely. I'll tell you about a client that I had a little while back as an example. This was somebody who already had a great deal of spiritual practice, already had done a lot of inner work, but they had reached a point in their life where there were some medical events that were happening that were pointing to a significant likelihood that a terminal and debilitating disease was around the corner for them, and that at some point, be it 6 months or 6 years from now or 16 years from now, their life would fundamentally change. And they were already beginning to have very disturbing symptoms related to this condition. And so they came to me because they were feeling profound fear, the possibility of facing a life-altering diagnosis, of having, their mortality, and not just mortality, but decline,
Yeah.
staring them right in the face. And so we did a series of journeys together that were really oriented towards connecting with the sense of safety, of strength, of resilience, of endurance that this person already possessed, but had sort of lost track of in the midst of the fear.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that they shared with me was the sense of, because I was actually able to experience the release of fear and these states of strength and resilience and courage, the fear and the relationship to fear fundamentally changed. That all of a sudden, the condition didn't go away. It's still something they're going to have to navigate in their life, but their relationship to it was altered enough so that, their spouse started remarking like, wow, you're not anxious about this anymore. You're really handling this differently. They started to be able to continue on with life, actually accomplishing all kinds of bucket list items, from, writing and publishing a book to connecting with family and all of these different things that, what really happened was they discovered the resources in themselves that meant that just because they were standing at the precipice of change, it didn't mean that they had to stop living their life. They could still continue to be happy, have meaning, and enjoy things with a sense of resilience and courage.
What a beautiful story. And I think it really speaks to the heart of the work, which has to do with changing our relationship to the things in our life that are standing in our way of living fully, meaningfully, purposefully, fulfilling whatever purpose or lessons we're here to experience. And it really reminds me, I do a lot of work with folks who have chronic pain and chronic illness, and, you know, training in pain reprocessing therapy and learning that it is not, the goal is not to necessarily get rid of whatever it might be that's causing the symptoms as much as it is changing your relationship to them, because it's the fear that drives the intensity of the symptoms.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We must work with a very similar client base.
I think they, yeah.
I have a really interesting span of like spiritual emergence and leadership and confidence and all of the relationship, but also so many people. And there's often overlap here, right?
Yeah.
Chronic pain, chronic illness, going through IVF or menopause or perimenopause, terminal or very life-changing illness. And there is something so vital in learning that oftentimes it's our reaction to the pain, to the suffering, to the stress that actually adds the most significant layer of pain and difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so powerful once people learn that, the amount that the suffering decreases. And as you said, with the story that you just shared, her external circumstances didn't change. It sounds like it was her relationship to it that made all the difference.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful. So I have so many other questions, but I want to stay focused. We could probably talk all day. I'm curious if we could just maybe shift a little bit, just because I know that a lot of what you do is you also do hypnotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm making an assumption that that's not the same thing as a shamanic journey. Would that be a correct assumption, or is there
There's some overlap. There's some overlap depending on how you work. But you are right. That is totally incorrect.
Okay, yeah. I figure okay. So tell us a little bit, I guess, about maybe starting with the overlap as a transition into what is hypnotherapy, and how does that work in terms of the work that you do with folks?
Absolutely. So starting with the overlap, one of the few hypnotherapeutic modalities that I work in is a modality called depth hypnosis. And the interesting thing about depth hypnosis is actually that it is a combination, a synthesis, a merging of hypnosis, shamanic wisdom and practices, Buddhist wisdom and practices, and transpersonal psychology.
Wow.
So it is a heavy hitting healing modality that really is a spiritual counseling modality designed to help us get to the roots of the places where we suffer most. We really are looking to go in, get underneath the surface, and bring healing and transformation to the places where the patterns that now stand in the way of our well-being and happiness really got started. So that is one form that I work in. I also work with integrative hypnosis, coaching for the unconscious mind, which is also a form of trance-based hypnotic work that is really oriented towards that neuroplasticity factor. The way that we can actually come in with a fear, with a phobia, with a habit, with a stuck belief or a pattern. And we do have the capacity to actually rewire and reconfigure the way that our brain and our nervous system responds through trance-based work. I find that both of these modalities are really complementary to one another. So, same with the shamanic journey. I have a tendency to mix and match depending on what the person who comes to me wants, what they need, what kind of change they're looking for. But, at its heart, hypnosis, if you've ever done a guided meditation, hypnosis at its start feels a lot like getting into a very relaxed state, being guided through a meditation. The difference between hypnosis and a guided meditation is that we're using this jumping off point of relaxation, of ease, of letting the nervous system begin to settle to go into a light trance where the client has agency, they have control. You can be sitting in your chair or lying on your couch. I do all my work over Zoom. And if the FedEx guy comes to the door, it's fine. You'll hear him. You're not going to miss the smoke detector going off or, anything like that. You'll be present. In a lot of ways, it's like kind of what we mentioned before, having a foot in both worlds. You'll be aware of your body. You'll be able to have control. You'll be able to be speaking and interacting with me the whole time, but you'll also be able to go into this trance-like state. And what hypnosis is like these days is it's very interactive. I think most of us have seen the sort of, you're getting sleepy, very sleepy, or stage hypnosis or something like that, where the person being hypnotized is very passive. And, the way that most contemporary practitioners are working these days, it's certainly how I work, is actually this is an interactive, collaborative, co-creative process that, I have a sense of the direction that we're heading in, but you're going to be sharing with me throughout what you're experiencing. And we're going to be navigating and weaving the experience based on what's happening for you. So this is one of the places where when people start to delve into this a little bit, they're often like, oh, I just thought you were going to kind of read a script and I would be better. But the reality is that we're actually venturing into the wilds of the unconscious mind together. And we are creating something that is healing and supportive of change in real time together.
Can you say a little bit about how that process, along with the depth hypnotherapy and the shamanic journeying, the one of the overlaps, it sounds like, is the access to the subconscious and the work that's done kind of below the conscious awareness. How does that interplay with one's nervous system? What shifts,
Yeah,
if
a
any?
great question. I love this. So, one of the ways that we move into trance in this work is through progressive relaxation. At its core, we're starting with nervous system regulation. A lot of the techniques that I use include things very specifically to let the vagus nerve become more and more, activated and aware that it is possible right now to go into a more parasympathetic state. So at its heart, there is this nervous system level thing going on. And then from there, we're actually using that supportive nervous system state. We all know, when you do acupuncture, when you get a massage or get energy work, all of these different things, you go into that parasympathetic place where deep healing is possible. So at its core, part of what we are first and foremost doing is activating the parasympathetic state so that we can be more open, so that we can get out of our own way, so that more is possible. Because the truth is, they've found that the speculation at this point is that about 5% of our beliefs, actions, choices, behaviors, habits, about 5% of all of that sort of stuff is conscious. And 95% of it is what's lurking beneath the surface. And so, part of this really is actually partnering with the nervous system to be able to drop that layer deeper that we can't access at that conscious thinking, talking, here in the world, making your grocery list sort of level.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because, our nervous system drives the bus, right? I mean, when it comes down to it, and it's got one job, and that is to keep us alive.
Yeah.
And it will do whatever it needs to do in order to make sure that happens, even if it is not the best thing for us from a spiritual, emotional perspective. And so this idea of like shifting into that parasympathetic state, dropping down, and from there working with the nervous system to access information and maybe even like collaboration and agreement around how we can do this in a more aligned way. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And so I love the way that you describe that. And it's just so aligned with, you know, the nervous system work that's really needed, especially kind of where we started with everything that's going on in the world right now. And, you know, I was just reading something the other day in terms of, you know, how much we walk around in fight, flight, and even in that dorsal vagal, which is the shutdown collapse mode or functional freeze, like between social media and the pressures of the world and the pressures we put on ourselves and the lack of safety that we have, we are really kind of unbalanced on the side of fear.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, part of what we are doing in a lot of this work is repatterning what is our relationship to fear? What is our relationship to stress? How do we help work with the nervous system so that not every email is a lion charging after you? You know, we really need to find that way. And, you know, some of the beautiful things in this trance-based work is that, you know, we're not just going into a relaxed state. We're going into a relaxed state and we're, you know, reprocessing memory. We're bringing in new learnings. We're oftentimes working with actually the internal sensory structure, you know, the visual field when we think of our boss and all of a sudden they're there looming in our face, you know, bigger than life. How do we actually take the charge out of some of the places where the biggest triggers are so that, you know, we don't pick up our phone and open our news app and immediately feel flooded with cortisol? You know, what are the ways that we can actually shift our internal processing so that we actually have more capacity, more resilience, and more agency?
Yeah, beautiful. So as we wrap up, I just have a couple more questions. One is, you know, given that you have these different modalities, if I am listening to this or I'm searching the web and I come across you and like, oh, this looks really cool, you know, I'm really struggling with, I don't know, let's just say I'm feeling anxious all the time because of what's going on in the world. How would you choose, or maybe we would choose together, which one of these modalities would be the best fit?
That's a great question. Usually we're choosing together. Sometimes people come in and they say, I really want to do shamanic journey work. That is what I'm interested in. Sometimes people have a very clear idea and they've done their research.
Mhm.
But a lot of the time, people just have this sense of like, I think there's something here that could benefit me. And so we really, every step of the way with me is a co-creative process. And I do tend to start with, okay, what's a gentle introduction into feeling that trance state, into feeling your own creativity and agency and capacity within that state so that we can just, you know, begin very gently to dip our toes into what it is like to work in this way. And even in those initial kind of gentle experiences, there's so much transformation and so much shift that can happen, you know, sometimes even in the first session or two.
Yeah, well, yeah, even just bringing awareness to awareness
Yes.
shifts things. Yeah, absolutely. And so if people want to find out more about you or if they have any questions, what's the best place to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best place is my website. It's julianasloane.com, and I'll spell it because it's easily misspelled. And there's apparently a famous singer with my same name now, just one letter different. So it's JulianaSloane.com. And so there's a button and a link there to learn more. I always offer a 30-minute introductory consult with folks who are interested in working with me, just so we can get a feel for each other. They can ask any questions. I really want to make this something that's accessible and not intimidating. So that is the way to find me.
That's beautiful. And I'll put all of that information in the show notes, as well as, are you on Facebook and Instagram? And
I'm on Instagram, not so active on Facebook anymore, but I'll make sure to get you those links too.
Awesome. Great. I'll put all of that in the show notes so that people can follow you and find out more about what you do. So as we prepare to say goodbye, is there any last things that you would like to share with folks, or anything that I didn't ask you that you feel is important?
Yeah, I guess the only thing that's coming up as we're signing off, if folks are interested in learning more about some of this work and curious about meditation, I also offer meditation classes online, and I teach at centers all over the southwestern United States. I also have a women's retreat coming up in the springtime. So if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, I could really use a few days to just get away and meditate and be in nature with other good people, I would love to invite you to join me.
Oh, that's incredible. So you'll give me that information.
I will, yeah.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was a wonderful conversation. It's so nice to connect with kindred souls along the way. And I just love all of the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Jody. This was such a delight to be able to spend this time with you. It really is, such a treat to be like, oh, here is a long lost friend. Here we are.
It's great when you find people who are doing the same work and just align. It's like, oh, I'm not alone. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining me today on The Spiritually Curious Therapist. I hope something in this conversation sparked insight, inspiration, or even a little soul-level curiosity. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you would take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's walking the healing path. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and keep following the wisdom of your heart.